When you reach a certain point in your life, you will experience tiredness that is not just physical, but also spiritual, in which the pain cannot be alleviated by any amount of sleep, where the smile that you have on your face begins to fracture beneath the pressure of everything that you're trying to keep to yourself. You enter a room and laugh when it is expected of you, nod when it is required of you, and speak when you are asked to do so. On the other hand, there's a pressure, a heaviness, and a question that you do not dare to ask. Why does everything hurt? Perhaps it's the criticism that stays with you for a long time after it's been said. There's a possibility that the betrayal is still resonating in your own bones. It's possible that the silent disappointments that pile up like stones on your chest are the cause. Obviously, you don't show any signs of it. In order to convince the world, and, at times, yourself that you are fine and untouchable, you have become an expert at maintaining your composure, acting that nothing can affect you, and convincing yourself that you are all right. You are not, however, because no one is, at least not in the way that we conceive. In addition, the fact that no one will ever tell you is that the more you strive to be untouchable, the more everything will inevitably touch you. When you make an effort to avoid experiencing pain, you end up becoming governed by it. When you construct emotional armor, you are essentially putting your soul in a cage. Not because you are a strong person, but rather because you are afraid, you become more rigid. I was terrified that if someone saw the real you, the one who was bleeding, the one who was untidy, exhausted, and fragile, they would not stay. Or, even worse, they would validate every concern you have ever had about yourself, including the notion that you are not sufficient, that you are not lovable, and that you are not safe. Carl Jung was aware of this as well. He did not instruct individuals on how to become unbeatable. Rather, he instructed them on how to become incompleteness. In addition, he stated that being entire does not imply that one is unaffected. It signifies that there is no fragmentation. To no longer deny any aspect of who you are, to no longer shield yourself from your scars, to no longer conceal your anxieties, and to no longer pretend that your pain isn't genuine. According to what he stated, we are not what happened to us. We are what we choose to become. However, in order to become anything that is true, we must first quit pretending, because the enemy is not pain. The enemy is your struggle with it. You believe that if you could only be stronger, if you could only care less, if you could react more slowly, and if you could think more clearly, you would finally be able to stop getting wounded. You have, however, attempted that, and it was unsuccessful, mostly due to the fact that it is not your gentleness that makes you susceptible, but rather your avoidance. It is not because you are weak because the agony comes and goes. Rather, it is because you are fractured, due to the fact that the tales from your past continue to reverberate inside the chambers of your unconscious mind. They have an impact on how you perceive yourself and what you are willing to tolerate from other people. It is possible that no one has ever told you this, so I will state it in a clear and concise manner now. The words that wounded you the deepest were not formed by the people who spoke them. Rather, they were fashioned within you 1,000 years ago. It was not the betrayal that caused you to break down. Rather, it was the confirmation of the grief that you were experiencing. You did not cause your wounds. Rather, the world brought them to light. It is not the words or actions that bring you pain. Rather, it is the things that it touches and the things that it reawakens. And if it reawakens something, it indicates that something was never fully healed. Rather, it was merely hidden under the surface. Jung referred to this as the shadow, which consists of the aspects of ourselves that we deny, the pain that we suppress, the emotions that we label as being too much, the trauma that we diminish, and the fury that we consume, the insecurities that we try to hide by dressing up perfectly. As long as these components continue to be submerged, they will always be in charge. You are under the shadow's sway for as long as you continue to be afraid of it. You will continue to react rather than respond to situations. You're going to continue to take the viewpoints of other people as the truth. The choices you make will continue to come from a place of fear rather than freedom. Because the wound is still present within you, no amount of self-help, no amount of success, and no amount of spiritual bypassing will be able to save you. So what exactly do? You give up going to war with yourself. You cease to produce results. Putting an end to the delusion that your power lies in your capacity to suppress your emotions is critical. Because true strength is not demonstrated by resistance, but rather by integration. It's the ability to sit with your anguish without passing judgment on it, to accept your uneasiness without allowing it to control you, to look at your fear and say, "You're allowed to be here, however, you no longer have the ability to drive." It is not dominance or detachment that constitutes power. Rather, it is presence. Additionally, presence is something that can only occur when you stop attempting to protect yourself from being human. Permit that to sink in. When there is nothing on the inside of you that is repressed, nothing can damage you. You will know that you have accepted the parts of yourself that scream out in the dark when you have made friends with your fear, when you have held your pain, when you have named your longing, and when you have accepted your terror. Mostly due to the fact that once you have confronted your own darkness, any other darkness cannot control you. It is impossible for an insult to destabilize you after you have confronted your guilt. Once you have reconciled with your history, no rejection can ever be able to define who you are. This is what it means to become untouchable. One does not become untouchable because nothing affects them, but rather because they have touched every part of themselves without exception. In addition, I am aware that it is easier to say than it is to accomplish, since confronting your suffering is not poetry. It is not beautiful. It is not something that can be captured in a clean caption. It is unattractive. It is unfiltered. It rips you apart. It exposes you to the elements, and it causes you to rethink everything that you have constructed your identity on. On the other hand, the light is able to enter through that breaking. It is not via further affirmations, strategies, or control that the true transformation begins. Rather, it is through surrender, through the act of proclaiming, "I will no longer run." Healing does not come from being more difficult. Rather, it comes from becoming more honest. And that honesty will cost you things, including relationships that flourished on your silence, roles that depended on your pretending, and narratives that required your cooperation. But it will provide you with something that is much more valuable: freedom. The freedom that no one can offer you. The freedom that comes from no longer needing protection because you have nothing left to conceal. This is the type of freedom that everyone can give you. Jung referred to this process as individuation, which simply means becoming real rather than becoming better. Stop living your life according to the laws of fear in order to become someone who is authentic. The goal is to stop constructing a life that is molded by the aspiration to remain unaffected, unshaken, and unbothered. Because those aspirations, despite the fact that they appear to be a sign of strength, are actually the result of profound suffering, wounds that were never seen, never held, and never healed. What it means to become real is to fully embrace your humanity and to stop dividing yourself into parts that are categorized as acceptable and unacceptable from that point forward. According to Jung's teachings, the most significant weight that a child can bear is the life that the parent has not lived. On the other hand, many of us not only carry the lives that were not lived by those who came before us, but we also carry their scars, which include their quiet, their shame, and their suppression. Also, we believe that it is ours. Not to be overly emotional, not to be overly sensitive, not to be overly loud, not to want too much, and not to feel too profoundly are all messages that we allow ourselves to internalize. In order to avoid the one thing that we fear the most, which is rejection, we shrink, we adapt, and we build personas to shield ourselves. These personas include smiles that conceal, achievements that distract, and perfectionism that earns us brief praise while progressively eating our soul. Therefore, we continue to have the belief that if we were completely seen, if our complete truth were brought to light, we would be abandoned, unwanted, and unchosen. This belief is rooted deep within us. Moreover, it is precisely this belief, that intolerable fear, that gives other people the ability to cause us harm. That is what makes a single sentence seem like a stab. That is what makes being ignored feel like abandonment. That is what gives the way that people treat us such a significant amount of weight. It is never about them, despite the fact that we believe it is about them. It is about the part of us that still feels we need to earn what we already are, still believes that our worth is dependent on their reaction, and still believes that we need further approval from them. This is the trap as well as the unconscious programming that is being used. On top of that, Jung dedicated his entire life attempting to assist us in escaping this trap. Before you bring that inner structure into the light, it will continue to rule your life, and you will refer to it as fate. He was aware of this fact. These patterns are not predetermined. Rather, they are representations of what is still present in your unconscious, of what is still looking for resolution, awareness, and reintegration. You may say things like, "I always get hurt. People always betray me. Love never lasts." However, these patterns are not predetermined. The goal is not to become more powerful than the suffering. Rather, it is to comprehend the reasons behind the existence of the agony in the first place, mainly due to the fact that suffering is never arbitrary and never without reason. You are not being punished. Rather, it is a signal, a message from your most fundamental self, coming from the one location that you have avoided the most. The unconscious is not a cemetery of thoughts that have been forgotten. Rather, it is alive, pulsating, and communicating, and for those times when it has no other voice, it talks via pain. If you choose to disregard its mutterings, it will scream. When you eventually listen to it and put your attention on it, however, you will start to decipher it. The realization that what you thought was weakness is actually a wound that is begging to be held. That what you thought was shame is a tale that needs to be rewritten. And that what you thought made you broken is actually the precise spot where your strength is hidden is something that you start to come to terms with. The path to power is not to act as if one does not care. Rather, it is to care passionately while letting go of the need to be controlled by that care or concern. Having the knowledge that someone can reject you and it will not destroy you. That someone may criticize you and it will not define you. And that someone can betray you and it will not destroy you is the source of this. Mainly due to the fact that you are no longer reliant on the external environment to mirror what you yourself already possess within you. The rules of the game shift when you become emotionally self-sufficient. Your pursuit of love comes to an end, and you stop bending to be liked. You give up on yourself. You cease making an effort to attain a sense of belonging in environments that deplete you, and you begin to live your life with integrity. You begin to say no without feeling guilty. Instead of being afraid, you begin to say yes. In order to protect yourself, you begin to create limits rather than to punish. Because you are now aware of the consequences of betraying yourself, and they are far too severe. You have come to the realization that emotional immunity does not mean being aloof. Rather, it means being clear. Clear about what you require, clear about how you feel, and clear about what you will no longer permit yourself to do. It is not the absence of suffering that serves as your safety. Rather, it is the absence of perplexity that serves as your protection. No longer do you have to question whether or not the mistreatment of another person is your fault. It is no longer necessary for you to bear the burden of repairing dysfunctional interactions. No longer do you feel accountable for how other people interpret the truth that you told them. Freedom does not consist of the absence of pain. Rather, it is the presence of one's own self. And certainly, there will be some who withdraw. This is a natural part of the process. The reason for this is that once you stop playing roles, the audience that came to see the show starts to leave. But allow them to. The departure of these individuals creates room for what is genuine, for others who accept you in your current state, for relationships that do not necessitate sacrifice in order to endure, for talks that provide nourishment rather than depletion, and for mirrors that reflect the truth rather than being distorted. But you won't get any of that until you make the decision to confront the darkness. Jung referred to this experience as the night sea journey, which included a descent into the unconscious as well as a confrontation with aspects of the self that has been disowned. It is disconcerting, just like any other drop would be. It is dark, and you find that you have lost your bearings. You start to wonder who you are. You start to unravel. In the process of unwinding, the truth starts to become apparent. This is not the truth that other people have told you, nor is it the reality that you have held to for protection. Rather, it is the profound truth, the truth that cannot be shaken, the truth that continues to exist even after everything else is lost. And at that moment, you come to the realization that you were never intended to be immune to suffering. It was not because suffering is a noble thing, but rather because it is a doorway to the self, to the soul, to the kind of strength that does not flinch, does not perform, and does not apologize. You were supposed to be transformed by it, the kind of strength that just knows. I've already confronted the darkest portions of myself. I've already experienced the most difficult aspects of myself. Because I have held them, they're no longer able to control me. When you reach that point, nothing and no one can ever hurt you again. This is not because life ceases being life. Rather, it is because you have learned to quit being a stranger to yourself. And when you stop being a stranger to yourself, life starts to become easier. This is not because difficulties disappear. Rather, it is because you're no longer looking for safety in the wrong places than you should be. You're no longer looking for permission from people who refuse to acknowledge your existence. By this point, you are no longer bending yourself into shapes that are suitable for incarceration. Something within you begins to stir, and it does so not with a roar, but rather with a whisper. You are the true you, the full you, the part of you that has never needed to be fixed, and you have only found it. A whisper that says, "I'm still here." Individualization is the term that Carl Jung used to describe this awakening, and it is a word that is both the most holy promise and the most terrible invitation possible. Develop into the person you have always been beneath the stories, the masks, and the defenses. Not the person they instructed you to be, not the person you became in order to live, but the person you have always been. Moreover, this process is not linear in nature. It is not well kept. At first glance, it does not make any sense. This is a spiral. After making progress, you begin to regress. First, you grow, and then you shrink. You get a sense of liberation, and then you experience grief. And it is important because becoming untouchable is not a moment. It is a road, a decision you make over and over again to stop abandoning yourself every time you are provoked and choose to halt instead of respond. This is why all of this is necessary. You reclaim a bit of yourself each time you hear the old tale in your head and declare, "That's not my truth anymore." Each time you choose silence over performance, boundaries over guilt, and presence over pleasing, you gain a piece of yourself back. You will become less susceptible to the emotional weather of others as you continue to do this, and you will become more sovereign rather than indifferent. When you stop trying to persuade the world to treat you with kindness, when you stop expecting that maybe this time they will change, maybe this time they will understand, and maybe this time they will stay, you will find a form of calm that you have never experienced before. You decided to let go of the possibility. You let go of the need to wait. It is during this process of letting go that you come to the realization that you are never intended to be carried by the shifting winds of the approbation of other people. The purpose of your existence is to be like a mountain, steady, still, and rooted, and to be aware that not everyone will meet you there. So that they don't have to grow, there are certain people who require you to remain tiny. If you are clear, there will be some people who feel intimidated by it, not out of malice, but because your progression brings to mind things that they have not yet encountered. There are certain people who will attempt to revert you back to your previous ways of doing things. On the other hand, you no longer shrink. You don't provide details. This is not a debate. You simply proceed with elegance, power, and gentleness in your actions. For the reason that you are now able to understand what they are unable to perceive, that serenity does not come from being unspoiled. Rather, it comes from not having to run anymore. Also, the game is over if you stop running or running. They are unable to lure you in. There is no way they can control you. Due to the fact that you have stopped playing, they are unable to confuse you. Not the kind of armor created from steel, but the kind made from the truth. This is the real armor. The sort that does not weight you down. It lifts you up, it opens you up, and it protects you, not by concealing your essence from the outside world, but by concealing it from the outside world. When you have reached a point of peace with the aspects of yourself that are being poked at, You are able to remain unaffected by criticism. Due to the fact that you have stopped exporting your worth, you do not crumble under the weight of rejection. As a result of the fact that your stability is no longer based on control, you do not dissolve when your plans fail. It is now you who is the center of your own gravitational pull. What a power it is to be able to move through the world without the need to be liked, understood, or validated, but at the same time remaining open, loving, and alive. You begin to move from alignment rather than fear, and you cease moving from fear. At this point, you cease defending and begin declaring. This means that you stop looking for security in things that are subject to change, and instead begin to embrace the one thing that is constant, the truth about who you are. Jung was aware that the majority of persons on this route would never take it. He was well aware that it was much simpler to construct walls than it was to break them down. Finding fault with other people is much simpler than looking inward. It is much simpler to remain asleep than it is to eventually come to terms with the whole weight and wonder of one's own soul. He was also aware that individuals who had the courage to bring the unconscious into consciousness would experience a liberation that very few people could even fathom. A liberty that is not founded on external conditions, but rather on one's own self-possession, and not on control, but on clarity. Clarity is something that cannot be taken away from you, not by the critic, not by the betrayer, not by the silence, and not by the loss, because clarity is something that exists within you. Once you have it, you're no longer affected by confusion because you have it. Your life is no longer torn apart by disorder. Your identity is no longer determined by the results. You develop into someone who is receptive rather than reactive, rooted rather than rigid, gentle but never little. This is not some kind of spiritual side door. It is not the purpose of this to pretend that life is no longer painful. It is about cultivating the emotional muscle to be able to experience everything and still maintain your integrity, to cry completely without drowning, to rage cleanly without destroying, to love madly without losing your center. Due to the fact that you have finally stopped rejecting your humanity, and in the process of doing so, you have gained your completeness. This is not because the world has changed. Rather, it is because you have changed. When you are entire, the world feels different. Even if you continue to go through the same storms, you are no longer carried away by them. It is the same complaints that you hear, but they no longer resonate with you. You continue to be exposed to the same dangers, but you no longer feel fear because you are aware of who you are. And the person that you are is not fragile. You are the one who brings together all of your suffering, all of your happiness, all of your yearning, all of your anger, and all of your love. When all of those components come together, when they are recognized, acknowledged, and valued, you transform into something that is unique and unshakable. That is not because you never fall, but rather because when you do fall, you get back up with more of who you are than you had before. And now that you have risen, not just once, but over and over again, you are beginning to grasp something profound. The world has not changed, but your place in it has. Because you are now the source of peace, you're no longer waiting for it to come from the outside. You are the source. For me, you are the anchor. Exactly, you're the fire. Because your internal conversation no longer reflects the projections of other people, the manner in which they communicate with you is less significant. As a result of your decision to quit leaving yourself, the manner in which other people leave you no longer breaks your heart. It is no longer the case that the manner in which individuals attempt to irritate you will result in chaos because your nervous system is no longer a battleground. Where there was once a conflict, there is now a safe haven. When you are at that holy place, you start living not for the purpose of protection, but for the purpose of expression. Healing, according to Carl Jung's teachings, is not about being immune to life. Rather, it is about becoming open to life in its whole, including happiness and sadness, happiness and grief, power and vulnerability, not as contradictions, but as energies that coexist. And when you come to this realization, you start to see that strength is not the absence of tenderness, but rather the basis of it. Confidence is not the same thing as arrogance. Rather, It is the serene knowledge that you are able to hold yourself whatever comes your way. You're no longer afraid of your emotions. You cease to consider them to be issues that need to be resolved. As time goes on, you come to realize that each wave of feeling is an invitation to look towards yourself. It is not a sign of weakness to experience grief. Rather, it is evidence that you loved. Anxiety is not your adversary. Rather, it is a messenger. You only put yourself in harm's way when you choose to ignore it. It is when you stop listening to yourself that third parties are able to exert their influence over you. However, this is no longer the case. Now you have restored your ability to listen. You have successfully got back your focus. This means that you're no longer concentrating on deciphering the actions of other people. Because of this, you no longer have to expend energy trying to control their behaviors, alleviate their distress, or anticipate that they would desert you. Because of this, you are no longer the emotional custodian of the shadows of other people. Now that you have returned to your own, rather than being afraid of the darkness, you are studying it out of curiosity. You grow as a result of it. You have chosen to remain silent and let it to speak. Jung's statement that one can only see the light when they are in the dark is exactly what he meant by that statement. You have come to the realization that the suffering that you have spent your entire life trying to avoid, the fear, the rejection, and the sting of being misunderstood, was never intended to be a form of punishment for you. Your body was attempting to wake you up. It was as if it were banging on the door of your soul, asking, "Are you prepared to finally get back to being yourself?" And now that you have a thorough understanding of it. The very things that you believed would bring you down turned out to be the way that led you to completeness. They were teachers, not because what they did was acceptable, but because the lessons you acquired from them were invaluable. The individuals who sought to break you were teachers. During this process, you discovered the areas in which you continued to deny your truth, where you continued to delegate your power, and where you continued to feel that you needed to earn love. Your vulnerabilities were exposed by their harm. Your boundaries were brought to light by their betrayal. You were able to be heard through their stillness. Now that you are aware of it, you withdraw your request for them to behave differently. You give up having hope that they will comprehend. It is no longer necessary for them to recognize your worth because you know it already. The fact that you are profoundly entrenched is what makes you untouchable. You are not invincible, and you are not distant. Due to the fact that you no longer confuse the projections of other people with your own identity, you are no longer subject to the actions or words of other people. You are able to hold their opinions without bringing them into your own. The judgments that others make can be heard without being internalized by you. It is possible to observe their actions without placing any significance on them in relation to who you are. In addition, this shift is very calm. In no way is it dramatic. No fanfare is associated with its arrival. It manifests itself in the instant that you pause before reacting, in the breath that you take before speaking, in the decision to walk away without explaining, and in the way that your shoulders relax when someone disappoints you because you no longer perceive it as a reflection of your worth. You may tell that transformation has taken place by the calmness and steadiness that you describe. And now, life begins to respond to this new vibration, not because you're manifesting more forcefully, but rather because you're no longer manifesting out of fear. No longer are you pleading with the universe to grant you what you desire in order to have a sense of security. It is safe for you since you have integrated yourself, which means that you have met every aspect of yourself and have not done anything wrong with any of them. As a result of this state of completeness, your decisions, your relationships, and your energies will all undergo transformations. Expansion occurs not as a result of your efforts, but rather as a result of your existence. Through the process of individuation, Jung felt that one could achieve liberation. You are now aware of the reason for this. When you have reached a state of completeness, no one can hold the keys to your tranquility. You cannot be destabilized by a single glance, a single comment, or an exit from the room. No one except you has the ability to control the story that is your life. This obligation, on the other hand, is not a burden. Rather, it is a gift. It indicates that you are liberated, not from misery, but from a sense of helplessness. You start to love again, but this time it is not out of a sense of deficiency, but rather out of a sense of abundance. When you start giving, it is not because you want to be picked, but rather because you have something genuine to offer. You start talking not because you want to be heard, but because you belong to the same group. Because of the integration that you have achieved, your life will become a reflection of that integration. This life will be quieter than you had expected, but it will be fuller, richer, and honest. In addition, when something unpleasant does occur, as it will, you respond to it in a different way. You do not fall into a downward spiral. You do not collapse, and you do not make those things signify anything about your value. After taking a deep breath, sitting down, feeling, and listening, you finally answer, not from the pain of the past, but from the knowledge you have gained. It is time for the shift. The crossing is located here. It is by this method that you ensure that you will never again be harmed by anyone or anything. The reason for this is not that life ceases to be life, but rather that you have ceased fighting against your own completeness. Moreover, now that you have passed the threshold, you have arrived not at a destination, but rather at a space within yourself that you have never genuinely occupied before. This is because you have crossed the threshold out of delusion, out of avoidance, and out of the old self that begged to be unbroken. A location that does not require you to be flawless, a location that does not require you to be unaffected by the outside world, a location that conveys the message that you are secure here, that you are complete, and that you are liberated. As you progress through life, you discover that you are no longer a reflection of the suffering of other people. Rather, you are the embodiment of your own clarity. You see with fresh eyes, and you hear with fresh ears. It is the same world, but you are experiencing it in a different way. As you enter a room, you no longer find yourself worrying if you are sufficient. Rather, you find yourself asking what about this space is congruent with the person you have become. You no longer assign others the burden of establishing your value, which means that you no longer overanalyze a text, an expression, or a silence without giving it due consideration. You have ceased to be someone who seeks protection. Rather, you are the one who provides it. And from this point on, relationships shift, not because you coerce them into doing so, but rather because your energy is no longer able to sustain the habits that have been established. You should refrain from engaging in emotional tug-of-wars, refrain from taking the bait, refrain from explaining your boundaries, and refrain from regulating how other people take the facts that you tell them. The only thing you need to do is live it, and those who are unable to do so will eventually abandon you in a calm and natural manner, without any drama or force. You are not being isolated. Rather, you're being liberated. Because the people who are still around are the ones who meet you in truth, who celebrate your growth rather than competing with it, who recognize your tenderness and do not read it as weakness, and who respect your clarity without requiring you to demonstrate it. Because they want you to be genuine, they do not want you to be smaller, quieter, or easier. That authenticity, on the other hand, serves as your filter. You are your own compass and standard. In addition, when the agony returns, and it will no longer be able to undo you. It enlightens you. It makes you more profound. And it serves as a constant reminder that you are still alive, still developing, and still human. You're no longer perplexed by it, and it is no longer able to take control of your identity. The number of fires you've been through is too great for you to forget who you are. You have experienced an excessive amount of reality to allow yourself to be enticed by illusion. You have worked hard to earn your self-trust, and at this point, it is more powerful than your fear. There's a quote attributed to Carl Jung that states, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. You have made that choice. You have made the decision to transform into a person who does not run away from themselves, who does not beg life to be easy, who does not put on armor to cover a wounded ego, but rather dissolves the ego in order to unveil the self that is underlying it. Individual who has reached a state of peace with the entirety of their being and, as a consequence, is immune to being influenced by people who are still engaged in a conflict with their own being. It is true that you are immune. It is true that you are invincible. The reason you are untouchable is not because you are numb, but rather because you are aware. This is what it means to be touchless. Because you have brought the unconscious into the light, because you have entered the flames of transformation and allowed them to consume everything that was not you, and because you have made the unconscious conscious. What has been left is unadulterated, unshakable, and holy. And it's possible that you're still in the thick of it. It's also possible that you're still shaking, still hurting, and still terrified. That is all right. It is not that you are late, that you are behind, or that you are broken. Rather, you are becoming. Having awareness for even a single instant is a step. Whenever you choose to halt rather than react, whenever you choose to feel rather than flee, and whenever you choose to choose truth over performance, you are continuously becoming. Transforming into the version of yourself that no longer requires being unspoiled by life, since they have attained a point where they're in touch with who they are. Let this moment be the turning point. Let this be the time when you stop chasing the life that shields you from sorrow and instead begin building the life that values all of you, including the anguish and the power that you feel. I hope that this is the day that you finally stop apologizing for being complete. Allow this moment to be the moment when you let go of the armor that is no longer suitable for you. Please allow this to be the invitation you have been waiting for to come home. Home to the version of yourself that cannot be twisted by flattery and cannot be destroyed by criticism. The self that has been through the fire and emerged not more difficult, but wiser, not louder, but clearer, not unaffected, but unafraid. Home to the voice within that says, "You are enough. Now you've always been enough." Home to the self who has walked through the fire and emerged not more difficult, but wiser. When you have made friends with your shadow, when you have welcomed your scars, and when you have anchored your existence in self-awareness rather than self-protection, nothing and no one can genuinely hurt you. This is because in the end, nothing and no one can truly hurt you. The end of suffering is not yet here. Rather, it is the end of the power that it has over you. Therefore, take a breath, not the shallow breath of someone who is mentally preparing themselves for life, but the deep breath of someone who has finally made the decision to experience life to the fullest, in the depth and in the truth. You have arrived at this moment, and no one else, not the past, not the critic, not the voice of doubt, not the next loss, not the next heartbreak, can take you away from this moment. To this day, no one will ever be able to take that away from you.